I have 13 years behind me in this work, and I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened on the night of October 3rd. I want you to understand that I am not a person who frightens easily. I'm not a person who sees things that are not there. And I am not a person who has ever in 13 years of working alone, with the dead at 3 in the morning, allowed myself to believe that anything in that cold room with me was anything other than what it was, which is a body, which is an absence, which is a thing that was a person, and is now the leftover evidence of a person, and nothing more. I need you to hold that understanding while I tell you this, because what I am about to describe is something I have gone over 10,000 times in the 2 years since it happened, and I have not found a single explanation that holds together. And I am a person who requires explanations to hold together. And so the fact that this one does not is something that lives in me every single day. The body comes in at 11:20 p.m. Male, 67 years old. Name on the intake form is Walter Kress. The cause of death listed is cardiac arrest, and the attending physician's notes indicate a straightforward case. No suspicious circumstances. No autopsy required. Family has been notified. Cremation scheduled for the following Tuesday. I sign for the intake. I move Walter Kress to prep table 2, and I begin my standard procedure. Paperwork first, always paperwork first, because the paperwork is the thing that keeps the work orderly, and the work being orderly is the thing that keeps a person functional. When the work is what this work is, the prep room at 11:30 p.m. is the same as it always is. Cold, which is necessary, brightly lit, which is also necessary, and carrying that specific silence that you either make peace with in the first year of this job, or you do not last past the first year. I have made peace with it. The silence of the prep room at night is not uncomfortable to me. It is simply the silence of a room where the only person capable of making noise is me. That is a fact. That has always been a fact. I hold on to that fact while I tell you what comes next. I begin the external assessment of Walter Kress at 11:47 p.m. Age consistent with documented years. Build consistent with the intake notes, no visible trauma. Skin coloration consistent with cardiac death of recent occurrence. Everything is exactly as the paperwork describes.
I'm 40 minutes into my prep work.
It is now approximately 12:30 a.m., and I am working at the head of the table when I become aware of a sound in the room that I cannot immediately identify. It is not loud. It is very quiet, in fact, which is part of why it takes me a moment to register it consciously, because quiet sounds in a quiet room do not always trip the wire of active attention immediately. But once I register it, I stop moving and I stand completely still and I listen. And what I hear is breathing. Slow, regular, shallow breathing coming from the direction of the table. I want to be precise about my internal state at this moment because I think precision matters here. I do not panic. I do not make a sound. I stand still and I go through the logical sequence that any trained professional goes through in this situation. Equipment sounds, air circulation system, my own breathing amplified in some acoustic way by the room. I go through every possibility and I address each one systematically. The air circulation in this room runs at a fixed frequency. I know by heart, and this is not it. The equipment in this room makes no sound resembling this. And my own breathing, which I am now doing as shallowly as possible in order to listen, is not what I am hearing, because what I am hearing continues at its own pace regardless of whether I am breathing or not. I look at Walter Kress. He is as he was. Still, eyes closed, hands at his sides. I look at his chest, and I watch his chest for 90 seconds without looking away, and it does not move. It does not move. But the breathing continues, and it is coming from him. And I am alone in this room, and those two facts cannot coexist in any framework I have ever been given for understanding the world, and yet there they both are, present simultaneously, At 12:31 a.m. on a Wednesday in October, in a prep room that smells of cold and disinfectant with the fluorescent lights buzzing very faintly overhead, I put my hand on his chest. I tell myself I am checking for some physiological explanation, some residual process, something that has a name in a medical textbook. What I feel under my hand stops that line of thinking entirely. Vibration, a subtle, rhythmic vibration beneath the sternum that I have felt before only once in my professional life. And that was when I was doing a prep, and the family called to say there had been a misidentification, and the person on my table was not the person who had died, and I need to stop immediately.
I step back from the table.
I go to my workstation and I pull the intake form, and I read it again, and it says what it said before. Cardiac arrest, attending physician confirmed, no suspicious circumstances. I pick up my phone and I call the on-call physician, Dr. Harlan, and I tell him calmly and precisely what I am observing, and I hear him go quiet in the way that a physician goes quiet when they are deciding whether the person calling them at 12:35 a.m. is having a psychological episode or describing something that requires their physical presence. He asked me to repeat what I said. I repeat it. He tells me he is coming in. While I wait, I do not leave the room. I know that sounds like the wrong decision, and I have asked myself many times since why I did not simply leave the room and wait in the hallway. And the honest answer is that leaving felt worse. Leaving felt like turning my back on something I did not yet understand, and turning your back on something you do not understand in this building at this hour felt like the more dangerous choice. So I stay. I stand at my workstation with my back to the wall, and I watch Walter Kress, and I listen to the breathing that continues at its slow, steady pace, and I wait. At 12:41 a.m. the breathing changes. It has been slow and shallow for the past 10 minutes, and now it deepens. One slow, deep breath, a pause, and then it returns to shallow. I write this in my personal log at exactly this moment because I want the timestamp and I want the detail recorded while it is immediate and precise. One deep breath, a pause, and then shallow again. Dr. Harlan arrives at 1:08 a.m. He is a man of 62, who has been in medicine for 35 years and who I have never seen display anything resembling alarm. He walks into the prep room and he goes directly to the table and he does what doctors do. He checks, he assesses. He brings out his instruments and he applies them methodically. He uses his stethoscope on the chest of Walter Kress for a very long time. He checks the eyes. He checks the hands. He reads the intake form. He checks the temperature. And then he steps away from the table and he stands with his back to me, looking at the wall for a moment, and he says very quietly that we need to call the intake physician. It is 1:15 a.m. when he makes that call. The intake physician, who certified the death of Walter Kress at 7:40 p.m., is a Dr. Sonia Mehta, and she does not sound asleep when she answers. She sounds like someone who has been waiting for a call she hoped would not come. And that quality in her voice over the speakerphone, in that cold, bright room, is something that raises every hair on my body. Simultaneously, Dr. Harlan tells her what we have. She asks one question. She asks if the family has been contacted about what she calls the secondary presentation. Harlan looks at me. I look at him. He tells her no. She says she is coming in, and that we should not proceed with any further prep, and that we should not under any circumstances leave the body unattended. Do not leave the body unattended. I have been doing this job for 13 years, and I have never been given that instruction. Bodies do not require attendance. Bodies are not going anywhere. The instruction, do not leave the body unattended, comes from a place of knowledge about something that I do not yet have, and the fact that Dr. Mehta has that knowledge and is choosing to drive to this facility at 1:15 in the morning rather than explain it over the phone tells me a great deal about the category of thing I am dealing with tonight. Dr. Mehta arrives at 1:54 a.m. She is 50, precise, and she walks in and goes immediately to the table and stands over Walter Kress with an expression I can only describe as recognition. Not surprise, recognition. She has seen this before, or she has seen something close enough to this that what she is looking at is not new to her. She turns to us and she asks how long since the breathing changed. And we tell her and she nods and she says that we are inside what she calls the window, and she says it like it is a clinical term she has used before. I ask her what the window is. She looks at me for a moment in the way a person looks at you when they are deciding how much to tell you. And then she says that in her 28 years of practice, she has encountered 4 cases of what she refers to as delayed biological persistence, which she describes as a state in which certain biological processes in a declared deceased patient continue beyond clinical death in ways that are not currently understood or documented in mainstream medical literature. She says that in each of the 4 prior cases, the persistence resolved on its own within a specific time window. She says that the family of Walter Kress was made aware of this possibility at the time of declaration. She says that is why they did not request an autopsy and why cremation was scheduled for Tuesday. I ask her what happens when the window closes. She picks up her bag and takes out a specific instrument I have never seen in a prep room before, and she says it becomes what it was always going to be. And I ask her what happens if the window does not close, and she looks at me over that instrument and she says, in a voice that is more careful than anything else she has said tonight, in 28 years it has always closed. At 3:17 a.m. the breathing stops. Not gradually, it simply stops mid-breath. The way a recording stops when someone cuts the power. Walter Kress is still and silent, and the temperature reading that Dr. Mehta takes at 3:18 a.m. is consistent with what it should have been when he arrived. Dr. Harlan and Dr. Mehta exchange a look that contains an entire conversation I'm not part of. Dr. Mehta packs her bag. She tells me to complete the prep as documented and to note in my log that arrival processing was delayed due to administrative review. She says it in a tone that makes clear this is not a suggestion. She leaves at 3:31 a.m. and I'm alone again with Walter Kress, who is now simply what the paperwork always said he was. And I stand in that bright, cold room for a long time before I go back to the table. I complete the prep. I do my job. I lock up at 5:50 a.m. and I walk out into the early morning, and I sit in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I can make myself drive. Walter Kress was cremated on Tuesday as scheduled. I have thought about Dr. Mehta's 4 prior cases every day since that night. I have thought about the family who knew, who had been told about the window and scheduled the cremation for after it would close. Who understood something about what happened to Walter Kress in the hours after death that most people who love someone never have to understand. And I think about what she said when I asked what happens if the window does not close. In 28 years it has always closed, which means she has been counting. Which means that somewhere in 28 years of practice, she developed the need to count. And I do not know what happened to make her start counting. And I think on balance, it is probably better that I do not. I still work the night shift. I still prep bodies alone at 3 in the morning, and the silence of the prep room is still something I have made peace with mostly, but I listen differently now. I listen in a way I did not before. October 3rd, and on the nights when the room is very quiet and I'm alone at the table and the fluorescent lights are buzzing very faintly overhead, I am aware in a way I cannot switch off that the difference between the silence of an empty room and the silence of a room where something is simply not making a sound, yet is not a difference you can see. It is only a difference you can hear if you are listening. And now I am always listening. Story number 2. I am going to tell you that I have worked overnight reactor monitoring for 16 years at the E. Alverson Nuclear Generating Station, and in 16 years I have seen exactly 3 genuine anomalies, 2 of which had immediate identifiable causes and 1 of which did not. And the one that did not is what I am here to tell you about tonight. And I need you to understand the weight of what I mean when I use the word anomaly in the context of a nuclear facility. Because in this context, an anomaly is not an inconvenience, and it is not a curiosity, and it is not something you look at and set aside and return to in the morning. In this context, an anomaly is the beginning of a sequence of events that, if not correctly identified and correctly responded to, has consequences that extend outward from this, building in every direction for a very long distance and for a very long time. I need you to understand that weight. I need you to be holding it when I tell you what I watched on my screens on a night in August 3 years ago, because the weight of it is the only way to understand why what I am about to describe affected me the way it did, and why it still does. The shift starts at 10 p.m. I am the primary monitor on the overnight rotation, which means I am the first set of eyes on every instrument reading in the facility from the moment I sit down until 6 a.m. when the day crew takes over. There are secondary monitors, but on a quiet night in a well-running facility, the primary monitor is effectively alone with the data and the hum of the building, and the specific quality of attention that this job requires, which is a kind of attention that is very difficult to describe to someone who has not done it. A sustained, focused, patient watchfulness that you develop over years, and that becomes as natural as breathing. At 10 p.m. the facility is nominal. Reactor output steady, coolant temperatures within parameters. Pressure readings exactly where they should be. All safety systems green. My colleague on the previous shift, a man named Faris, hands off with a clean log and the specific relief of someone finishing a quiet shift. And I settle in. I make my first entries. I start my monitoring sequence. And for the first 3 hours, nothing nominal, steady, the building doing exactly what it is designed to do, with exactly the reliability that 16 years of experience tells me to expect. At 1:07 a.m. reactor coolant temperature in loop 2 ticks up, not dramatically, 0.3 degrees above baseline. In most contexts, 0.3 degrees is nothing. In this context, 0.3 degrees in loop 2 at 1:07 a.m. on an otherwise completely stable night gets my full attention immediately. I note it, I watch it. It holds for 4 minutes and then returns to baseline. I log it as a minor fluctuation, flag it for morning review, and continue monitoring. At 1:19 a.m. it happens again, this time 0.4 degrees. This time it holds for 7 minutes. I am now running a parallel diagnostic on the loop 2 temperature sensors because the most likely explanation is instrumentation, and I want to confirm or eliminate that possibility before I consider anything else. The diagnostic takes 11 minutes to run and comes back clean. The sensors are functioning correctly. The 0.4 degree rise was real. I call the duty supervisor, a man named Prokop, and I walk him through what I have. He tells me to continue monitoring and to call him if it exceeds 0.5 degrees or if any other system shows a corresponding change. Standard protocol. Exactly what the procedure book says. I go back to my screens. At 1:44 a.m. loop 2 temperature rises 0.6 degrees, and this time it does not hold and return to baseline. It continues to rise, slowly, steadily, with a consistency that is different from the previous 2 events. Those felt like pulses. This feels like a direction. I call Prokop. He comes to the monitoring room and stands behind me and watches the screen and says nothing for 90 seconds, and then he calls the shift engineer. The shift engineer, a woman named Dr. Vasic, arrives at 2:01 a.m. And by this time, loop 2 temperature is 1.1 degrees, above baseline and climbing at a rate of approximately 0.1 degrees every 4 minutes. Not an emergency rate, not a rate that triggers automatic safety protocols, but a rate that is wrong, that is unexplained, and that in 16 years of monitoring, have never seen in a facility running at this operational stability. Dr. Vasic runs her own diagnostics. She checks the physical monitoring systems. She checks the coolant flow rates. She checks the heat exchange systems. She checks everything that could account for a rising temperature in loop 2, and one by one the checks come back without an answer. The coolant is flowing correctly. The heat exchangers are functioning correctly. The reactor output is steady. Everything that should be generating or moving heat in loop 2 is doing exactly what it should be doing, and yet the temperature is rising, and it has been rising continuously now for 41 minutes and is currently sitting at 1.8 degrees above baseline. At 2:23 a.m. something happens that changes the character of the night completely. Reactor output, which has been steady since 10 p.m., begins to rise. Not sharply, gradually, the same quality of gradual that the temperature has had. A direction rather than a spike. And here is what matters. Here is what Dr. Vasic and Prokop and I all register at the same moment when we see it on the screen. Reactor output rising and loop 2 temperature rising should have a relationship. One should be causing the other, or both should be caused by the same thing. But when Dr. Vasic runs the correlation analysis, the numbers do not support a causal relationship between the 2 rises. They are rising independently, at different rates on different curves, as if they have different sources. 2 separate things are happening simultaneously in this reactor, and we do not know what either of them is. By 2:40 a.m. we have 7 people in the monitoring room. The facility safety officer has been called. The night maintenance team is doing a physical walkthrough of the reactor building. I am watching 11 different screens simultaneously and logging every change in real time, in the picture that is developing across those 11 screens is something I do not have a framework for. It is not a standard fault pattern. It is not matching any scenario in the training protocols. I have spent 16 years studying. The changes are too distributed, too simultaneous, too perfectly graduated in their progression to read as the kind of cascading failure that has causes and consequences in a logical sequence. At 3:04 a.m., the maintenance team doing the physical walkthrough calls in from the reactor building. The team leader, a man named Birch, reports that the instruments on the physical gauges inside the building, the analog instruments that exist as a backup, independent of the digital monitoring systems, are reading differently from what I am seeing on my screens. Not dramatically differently, but differently. And the direction of the difference is the thing that matters. The physical gauges inside the building are reading lower than my digital displays, which means either the digital systems are reading high, or the physical gauges inside the building are reading low. And both of those possibilities have implications that nobody in this room wants to follow to their conclusion. Dr. Vasic makes the call at 3:11 a.m. She initiates a controlled precautionary power reduction. Textbook response to an unexplained rising trend in a monitored system. The procedure is clean, the execution is clean, and over the next 40 minutes reactor output is brought down to 60% of operational level. And as we bring it down, the loop 2 temperature begins slowly to follow. Not immediately. There is a lag that Dr. Vasic notes and that I log, and that nobody in the room fully explains. A 14-minute lag between the output reduction and the temperature. Response that is longer than the thermal dynamics of the system should produce. But it follows. And by 4:30 a.m., both readings are trending back toward baseline, and by 5:15 a.m., they are within normal parameters, and the facility is quiet again. The post-incident review takes 3 weeks. The engineering team goes through every system, every sensor, every line of data from that night, and the report they produce is thorough and detailed, and it attributes the temperature anomaly to a previously undetected microfracture in a heat exchange coupling in loop 2, and the output variation to a control rod calibration drift. Two separate causes for two separate anomalies, occurring simultaneously. Coincidence. The report uses that word, coincidence. I have read that report many times. I know what a microfracture in a heat exchange coupling does to temperature readings, and I know the profile it produces, and the profile from that night does not match it. I know what a control rod calibration drift looks like in the output data, and the curve from that night is not that curve. I signed off on the report because Dr. Vasic asked me to, and because the alternative, a report that says we do not know what happened in this reactor on this night, is not a document that a nuclear facility can have in its record without consequences that extend far beyond the building. But here is what I think about. Here is the thing that comes to me at 3 in the morning when I'm sitting at my screens in a facility that is running nominally and quietly and correctly. The maintenance team inside the reactor building that night. Birch and his 3 crew members doing the physical walkthrough while Dr. Vasic and I were managing the data. I reviewed their walkthrough log as part of the incident review. Their log is complete and professional and matches the timeline exactly. But there is one entry at 3:08 a.m., 6 minutes before Dr. Vasic initiated the power reduction, that was flagged during the review and then quietly removed from the final report. Birch wrote it, and it says, in the flat factual language of a maintenance log, observed movement in the reactor containment visual inspection window, biological, duration, approximately 4 seconds, unable to identify. The reactor containment visual inspection window looks into the space directly surrounding the reactor vessel. That space is inaccessible during operation. It is flooded with coolant water during operation. Nothing biological can be in that space during operation. Nothing biological can survive that space during operation. Birch's entry was removed from the report on the grounds that it was a visual misidentification under stress conditions. Birch himself, when I spoke to him privately 2 weeks after the incident, told me he stood by what he wrote. He told me it was large. He told me it was close to the glass. And he told me that in the 4 seconds he watched it, it did not move the way something moves when it is trying to get out. It moved the way something moves when it is exactly where it wants to be. I still work the overnight shift. I still sit at my screens from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. watching the numbers that tell me what this reactor is doing. Everything has been nominal since that August night 3 years ago. The facility runs correctly, and the reports are clean, and the post-incident modifications that were made based on the microfracture and calibration drift findings have been signed off as satisfactory. Everything is fine. Everything is normal, and I sit at my screens every night in the specific quality of attention that this job has given me over 16 years, and I watch the numbers, and I watch the loop 2 temperature with a particular focus that it did not have before. And once a shift, every shift, I find myself looking at the reactor building through the monitoring room window at the dark structure of it sitting in the facility, and I think about what Birch saw through that glass. And I think about the 14-minute lag between the output reduction and the temperature response. And I think about whatever was in that coolant water that was exactly where it wanted to be. And then I look back at my screens. Because that is my job, to watch and to keep watching, no matter what the numbers start to do. Story number 3. I took the posting at Harrow Point Lighthouse because I wanted the solitude, and I wanted the coast, and I want to be honest with you from the beginning about the fact that I am a person who does not have a great deal left on the mainland that holds me there. That is not a sad thing, it is simply a true thing, and it matters for this account because the people who knew me before I took this posting, and who I have told pieces of this story to, have occasionally suggested that my state of mind or my isolation made me susceptible to seeing things that were not there. And I want to address that directly by telling you that I am one of the most grounded, least imaginative people I know, and that the isolation of Harrow Point far from making me see things, it gave me a quality of attention and observation that I did not have before, a clarity that comes from long hours of watching, a fixed point in an environment that does not change, which means that when something changes, you see it with a precision that a person living in a busy and noisy world does not have access to. Harrow Point sits on a rock formation 11 miles off the northern coast. The lighthouse has been operational since 1902. I'm the only permanent resident. Supply boat comes every 2 weeks. In between, it is me and the light and the ocean, which in the winter months is a gray and serious ocean that does not invite romanticism. I keep the light running, I log weather and maritime data, I maintain the equipment, and I watch the water. That is the job. The ships start disappearing in my 3rd month. I want to be precise about what I mean by disappearing, because the word suggests something dramatic, and what actually happens is quiet and almost bureaucratic in its strangeness. A vessel appears on my radar, moving on a standard shipping lane, heading south-southwest. I log it as I log every vessel that passes within my monitoring range. I maintain visual contact through my telescope when visibility allows, and then at some point during its passage through my monitoring zone, the vessel is simply no longer there, not at the edge of my radar range, not beyond the horizon, simply no longer present on any instrument, as if it has been removed from the situation entirely. The first time it happens, I file a report with the Coast Guard, and they conduct a search and find nothing, and attribute it to a radar malfunction and send a technician to check my equipment, who finds nothing wrong with it. The second time it happens, 3 weeks later, the Coast Guard search again, finds nothing, and this time, the official determination is that the vessel in question had already passed outside my monitoring zone before. I registered its absence, which is an explanation that does not hold up against my log times, but which is the explanation that goes into the record. By the 6th disappearance, I have stopped calling the Coast Guard because the calls have developed that quality I cannot stand. The quality of patience extended towards someone who is seen as a problem rather than a reporter of problems. I keep my own log. I document everything. Date, time, vessel type were identifiable, last confirmed position, time of disappearance from instruments. By the end of my 5th month, I have 11 entries in my private log. What I notice in reviewing these entries is a pattern that I initially dismiss as coincidence and then cannot continue to dismiss because it is too consistent. Every disappearance occurs within a specific quarter-mile section of water to the northeast of the point, a section I begin to think of simply as the area, and every disappearance occurs within a 2-hour window, centered on 2 a.m., not all at 2 a.m. exactly. The range is 12:50 a.m. to 3:10 a.m., but 11 events, 11 vessels, all within the same geographic quarter-mile, all within the same 2-hour overnight window. That is not a radar malfunction. That is not a coincidence. That is a location and a time. In my 6th month, I begin keeping watch specifically during that window. I am at my telescope from midnight to 3:30 a.m. on the nights when the shipping lane is active, which is most nights, and I'm watching the area with the focused patience that this posting has developed in me. For 3 weeks I watch and nothing unusual happens. Vessels pass through the area on their standard headings and continue on their way, and my instruments track them cleanly all the way to the edge of my monitoring range. I begin to think the pattern has ended, that whatever was happening has stopped. On a Tuesday in January, a container vessel enters my monitoring zone. At 1:20 a.m., heading south-southwest, moving at standard speed. I log it, I pick it up in my telescope. Visibility is good tonight, cold and clear, and I can see its running lights clearly, the red and green of the bow lights, and the white of the mast light, moving steadily through the dark water. It enters the area at 1:47 a.m. And then, over the course of approximately 90 seconds, the lights go out. Not all at once, in sequence. First the green bow light, Then after about 20 seconds, the red bow light. Then the mast light. And then the vessel is dark. And dark vessels on a dark ocean at night become invisible very quickly. And within another 40 seconds, I've lost visual contact. I go immediately to my radar. The vessel is not on my radar. I check the instruments. Everything functioning correctly. The vessel is simply not there. I keep my telescope on the area. I watch for the next 2 hours, and I see nothing. At 4 a.m., I go to my logbook and I write down everything. The sequence of the lights going out, the timing, the exact position, and as I am writing, I become aware of something that I have not been aware of before in 6 months of living on this rock, which is that the ocean to the northeast of the point, the water over the area is flat, not calm, flat. The ocean around Harrow Point is never flat. There is always movement, always swell, always the evidence of a body of water in motion. But the quarter-mile of water over the area at 4 a.m. on this January morning is as flat and still as a floor, while the water on every side of it moves normally, and the line between the flat water and the moving water is sharp and exact, like a boundary, like a border that the ocean itself is observing. I watch the flat water until sunrise. At 6:44 a.m., with the first full light of day on the ocean, the flatness is simply gone. The water over the area is moving like all the other water. Whatever was holding it still has let it go. I begin researching the history of Harrow Point. I write to the Maritime Archive and request historical records, incident logs, anything relating to this section of coast. The archive sends me 3 boxes of documents, and I go through them over 2 weeks of evenings, and what I find in those documents is this. The area has a name. It has had a name since at least 1887, when the earliest records in the archive begin. The local fishermen of that era called it the Still Patch, and they did not fish it, and they did not sail through it at night. The lighthouse logs from 1902 onward contain references to vessel disappearances in the area that begin with the first keeper, a man named Aldous Crane, who logged 6 disappearances in his first year, and who, in his personal diary, which is included in the archive materials, wrote about the Still Patch with a specificity that tells me he spent a great deal of time watching it the same way I have. Crane's diary entries about the Still Patch span 4 years. They are detailed, observational, methodical, the entries of a practical man trying to understand something he cannot fit into a practical framework. He describes the flat water. He describes the 2 a.m. window, which he identifies in his second year. He describes watching vessels enter the area and simply cease to exist. And in his 4th year, in a series of entries that become progressively shorter and more clipped in the way that entries become when a person is writing quickly or writing under some kind of internal pressure, he begins to describe something else. He describes seeing on multiple occasions something in the water of the Still Patch during the day, not at night. During the day, in good visibility, something below the surface of the flat water. He does not describe it in detail. He uses the word formation in one entry and the word structure in 2 others, and in his final entry on the subject he writes only, "It is not natural, and it is not new, and it knows the light is here." Crane's diary ends in 1911. The archive record shows he left the posting in 1911 and no reason is given. I wrote to the archive asking if there was any further record of Aldous Crane after 1911, and they wrote back after 3 weeks to tell me that there was not. No death record, no census record, no subsequent employment record. Aldous Crane left Harrow Point Lighthouse in 1911 and ceased to exist in any official record from that point forward. I have been at Harrow Point for 14 months now. I have logged 31 vessel disappearances in my private log. I have not reported any of them after the first 6, because the reporting leads nowhere, and because I have come to understand, slowly and reluctantly, that what is in the area is something that the official systems that handle maritime incidents are not equipped to address and may not be aware of. The Coast Guard that responds to my reports is looking for wreckage and survivors and equipment malfunction. And those are the right things to look for in most situations, and they are the completely wrong things to look for in this one. 3 weeks ago, I saw the structure for the first time. I had been watching the area in daylight with my telescope after a night of particularly flat water, and I was about to put the telescope down when the angle of the afternoon light on the water changed slightly. And in that change, in that specific low-angle winter light, I saw it. Below the surface, large, geometric in a way, that natural. Formations are not corners, lines, the evidence of intention in the shapes of it. A structure below the still patch of water to the northeast of Harrow Point Lighthouse is sitting on the bottom in water that the chart shows as 300 feet deep, and it is large enough that I can see its outline clearly from 11 miles away with a standard maritime telescope. I sat with my eye at that telescope for 1 hour and 40 minutes until the light changed again, and it went below my visibility threshold. And in that 1 hour and 40 minutes, I thought about Aldous Crane writing "It knows the light is here," and I thought about 31 vessels that passed into that quarter mile of water and did not pass out. And I thought about what is inside a structure that sits 300 feet below the surface of the ocean and has been there long enough for fishermen to name the water above it in 1887, and possibly long enough before that for nobody to remember a time when it was not there. I thought about what collects over time in a place like that, what accumulates, what is kept. I keep the light running. I do my job. Every night from midnight to 3:30 a.m., I watch the area and I log what I see, and I maintain my private record with the care and precision that Aldous Crane maintained his diary and that the keepers between us maintained their logs. Each of us watching the same piece of water from the same rock. Each of us arriving at the same understanding in our own time. Each of us continuing to keep the light burning anyway, because that is the job. And because whatever is down there in that structure under the still water, whatever has been taking ships for as long as this coast has had ships to take, it has never come to the rock. In 123 years of records, it has never come to the rock. And I choose to believe, that the light has something to do with that. That the light is the reason. That as long as I keep the light burning and the light keeps reaching out across that water and touching the still patch, every few seconds with its slow sweep, whatever is in that structure stays where it is, and the rock stays safe and I stay here. But I think about the 31 vessels. I think about them a great deal. I think about the people on them who watched their instruments and saw nothing wrong and sailed into that quarter mile of water at 2 a.m, not knowing what was below them and not knowing that the water above it goes flat, and that the going flat is the last thing, the very last thing before the lights go out. And I think about them being down there now, in the structure, in the dark, 300 feet below the still water, in something that was built by something that is not us and that has been there longer than we have, and that, as far as I can determine from 123 years of records and 1 afternoon of winter light at the right angle, has never once been full. I keep the light burning. I watch the water, and every morning when the sun comes up and the still patch releases and the ocean moves again over the area, I'm grateful for one more night of distance between this rock and whatever patience is waiting beneath it. And every night when I sit down at midnight to begin my watch, I remind myself that Aldous Crane kept this light burning for 4 years after he understood what was out there. 4 years. I have been here 14 months. I think about those 4 years and what it took to stay. And I think about the light and what it costs to keep it. And I tell myself what I tell myself every night, which is that the light is worth it. The light matters, and I am the one who keeps it burning. And as long as I do, the rock is safe. I tell myself that every night. I need to keep telling myself that every night. Because the alternative, the thought that lives at the back of everything, and that I do not let myself look at directly, is the question of what happens to the rock. And to me, on the night that I stop,